The Aberfan Disaster. On the morning of October 21st, 1966, in the small Welsh village of Aberfan, 240 children sat in their classrooms at Panglas Junior School. Just above the village on the steep mountainside loomed a massive spoil tip containing over 100,000 tons of coal waste. Heavy rain had fallen in the weeks before, soaking the waste. Residents had previously reported concerns about the stability of the tip, but were ignored by the National Coal Board, who ran the site. At around 7:30 a.m., workers noticed that the tip had begun to subside. They reported the slip, but the supervisor shrugged it off. At around 9:15 a.m., with the children already in class, the side of tip number 7 suddenly gave way. A black avalanche of liquefied coal waste, moving at over 80 miles per hour, roared down the mountain. It slammed into Panglas Junior School and a row of houses. In just minutes, the school was completely engulfed under 40 feet of slurry. Teachers and children had almost no time to react. Villagers rushed to the scene and began digging with their bare hands. 116 children and 28 adults were buried under thick mud, sludge and rubble, half the village's youth. Investigations revealed that the incident was entirely preventable. Officials had dismissed warnings about the tip's instability and previous slips on the same mountainside multiple times, and the National Coal Board had built tip number 7 knowingly on top of unstable ground. No one was ever prosecuted. The Tenerife airport tragedy. On March 27, 1977, at the small and overcrowded Los Rodeos airport on the island of Tenerife, two fully loaded Boeing 747 jumbo jets sat on the runway in dense fog. KLM flight 4805 was at the end of a runway preparing for departure. Pan Am flight 1736 was still taxiing slowly down the same runway, but missed its correct exit due to missing markings and near-zero visibility. The KLM captain was eager to leave and released the brakes after hearing only "okay" from the control tower, who couldn't see the runway, despite his co-pilot's concern about the Pan Am's plane's position. A simultaneous radio call from the Pan Am plane created interference that blocked the second half of the controller's message, which included the instruction to stand by for takeoff and "I will call you," and this led the KLM plane going full throttle. The Pan Am's crew's message, "We are still on the runway," was also inaudible to the KLM crew. The KLM captain continued his takeoff drive even after his co-pilot had doubts that the Pan Am wasn't clear of the runway. When Pan Am Captain Grubbs spotted the KLM at a 100-meter distance, saying, "Damn it, that son of a gun is coming," it was already too late. The KLM jet slammed into the Pan Am plane at 160 miles per hour, ripping through its midsection. The KLM machine exploded on impact, killing all 248 people on board, while 335 of 396 people on the Pan Am plane were also killed. Only 61 survived. The Banqiao Dam Catastrophe. Construction of the Banqiao Dam began in 1952 on the Ru River in Henan province, part of Chairman Mao's aggressive push to modernize China quickly. Engineers designed the dam to hold 500 liters of rain per square meter over 3 days. But senior engineer Chen Qing warned that the dam was not strong enough for the region's typhoons. His warnings were ignored. He was called a rightist and taken off the project. The final design even cut the number of sluice gates from 12 down to 5 to cut costs. In early August 1975, Typhoon Nina brought days of relentless rain. As the reservoir filled to dangerous levels, operators desperately tried to release water. The spillways were not enough. And when they tried to get permission to open the gates wider, the phone lines were already down because of the storm. At 1 a.m. on August 8th, the dam collapsed. A towering wall of water, several meters high and 6 miles wide, crashed down the valley, wiping out villages in minutes. The flood then triggered the collapse of more than 60 other dams downstream. Official records say 26,000 people died, but the real number, including deaths from hunger and disease afterward, may have reached 240,000. The Rana Plaza Incident. On the morning of April 24, 2013 in Dhaka, Bangladesh, over 3,000 garment workers arrived at the Rana Plaza building for their shift. The 8-story building, built without proper permits, housed 5 garment factories that supplied apparel to major Western brands. The day before, large cracks had appeared in the concrete pillars and walls. Engineers inspected the building and declared it unsafe. The factories were ordered to close, but the owners ignored the warning. They threatened to cut workers' pay or fire them if they refused to come inside. At around 8:30 a.m., the workers already sat at their sewing machines, but the building suddenly began to shake. Within seconds, the entire structure collapsed like a house of cards. Floors pancaked on top of each other, trapping thousands of people under tons of concrete and rubble. The collapse killed 1,134 people, mostly young women, and injured many more. 38 people were charged with murder, along with the building owner who tried to flee to India. The MV Doña Paz Tragedy. On the night of December 20th, 1987, the MV Doña Paz, a crowded passenger ferry, was sailing through the Tablas Strait in the Philippines. The ferry was dangerously overloaded, licensed to carry only around 1,500 people, but over 4,000 passengers were on board, many of them standing on the decks and sleeping in the hallways. The crew was not on the bridge, with many reportedly watching TV or drinking in their quarters. Around 10:30 p.m., the ferry collided with a small oil tanker called MT Vector in the dark. The tanker was carrying gasoline and was also being operated with an unqualified crew and no proper lookout. The impact caused a massive fire that spread extremely fast. Most passengers were trapped below deck because the life jackets were locked away in storage. Most couldn't even reach the deck in time. The ferry sank within hours. In total, at least 4,386 people died from burning, drowning, or asphyxiation. The Bhopal Disaster. On the night of December 2nd, 1984, the Union Carbide plant in Bhopal, India, was undergoing routine maintenance. The plant produced a popular pesticide using methyl isocyanate, one of the most toxic chemicals in the world. To save money, the company had turned off the refrigeration system that was supposed to keep the chemicals cool and stable. Many critical safety systems, including the vent gas scrubber and flare tower, were either shut down for maintenance or not working properly. The plant was also running with reduced staff and poorly trained workers. That night, workers were washing corroded pipes connected to storage tank E610, which contained 42 tons of methyl isocyanate. Because they didn't properly isolate the tank, water accidentally flowed back into it, triggering a violent chemical reaction. Temperature and pressure inside the tank began rising rapidly. Workers noticed the problem but were unprepared for the emergency because of insufficient training. Around 1 a.m., a massive relief valve burst open, releasing a deadly gas cloud that drifted over the sleeping neighborhoods around the plant. People woke up choking with burning eyes. Many ran outside into the gas, which made their exposure even worse. Others never woke up. Several thousand people died in the first few days. More than 500,000 were exposed to the toxic gas. 4,000 people suffered disabling injuries. Long-term death toll estimates range between 15 and 20,000 people. The Minamata Incident. In the early 1950s, in the fishing town of Minamata, Japan, local residents and their cats began acting strangely. Cats started twitching, spinning in circles, and throwing themselves into the sea to die. The locals called it dancing cat disease. By May 1956, doctors reported the first human cases. Patients suffering from slurred speech, vision and hearing loss, uncontrollable shaking, and severe brain damage. Some victims went mad or fell into comas. Pregnant women gave birth to babies with deformities and disabilities. The cause was methylmercury poisoning. The Chiso Corporation's chemical factory had been dumping untreated wastewater containing mercury directly into Minamata Bay for decades. The mercury accumulated in the fish and shellfish that the local community ate every day. Chiso continued discharging the waste even after the first cases appeared, and scientists eventually linked the disease to their factory. The company denied responsibility. The poisoning continued until the factory finally stopped dumping mercury in 1968. Over 1,400 people had officially died from Minamata disease, with thousands more left with permanent brain damage and disabilities. The Swill milk scandal. In the 1850s, in the crowded slums of New York City, thousands of poor families bought milk from local dairies to feed their babies. But the milk came from cows kept in filthy dark stables behind city distilleries. These cows were fed nothing but distillery waste, the leftover grain mash and slop from whiskey production. The waste was cheap, so distillery owners turned it into a side business. The cows quickly became sick and produced thin, bluish milk. To hide the bad color and smell, dairymen added plaster, chalk, molasses, and chemicals to whiten and thicken it. They sold this toxic swill milk at a low price to the poorest neighborhoods. Babies who drank it developed severe stomach problems, diarrhea, and convulsions. Many died within days. In 1858 alone, swill milk was linked to over 8,000 infant deaths in New York City. The Beirut Port Incident. In August 2020, the port of Beirut in Lebanon had a large warehouse containing 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate, a highly explosive chemical used for fertilizers and bombs. The dangerous chemical had been seized from a broken-down cargo ship in 2013 and stored in Warehouse 12 for over 6 years, right next to 40 bags of fireworks. Port officials and government ministers received multiple written warnings about the extreme danger, but did nothing. On the afternoon of August 4th, 2020, workers were welding a door near the warehouse. Around 5:40 p.m., a fire broke out, likely started by sparks from the welding work. The fire quickly reached the fireworks, and then the huge pile of ammonium nitrate. At approximately 6:07 p.m., the chemicals detonated in one of the largest non-nuclear explosions ever recorded. A massive fireball and powerful shockwave ripped through the port and destroyed large parts of Beirut. The blast killed at least 218 people, injured over 7,000, many permanently disabled, and left around 300,000 people homeless. The Halifax Nightmare. On the morning of December 6, 1917, in the busy harbor of Halifax, Canada, during World War I, two ships were heading toward each other in a narrow channel. The French cargo ship SS Mont Blanc was fully loaded with 3,000 tons of explosives, TNT, picric acid, and barrels of highly flammable gasoline. The Norwegian ship SS Imo was driving on the wrong side of the channel to pick up relief supplies, but the ships failed to communicate properly. At around 8:45 a.m., the two ships collided at just 1 mile per hour, but the collision knocked over benzol barrels and started a fire on the Mont Blanc's deck. The fire burned for about 20 minutes while sailors tried to fight it and people on shore watched the black smoke rising. Then, at 9:04 a.m., the entire cargo detonated in one enormous explosion, the largest man-made explosion in history before the atomic bomb. The blast created a 60-foot tsunami that swept through the harbor, destroyed the entire Richmond district of Halifax, shattered windows up to 60 miles away, snapped trees, and threw debris for miles. Nearly 2,000 people were killed instantly, and around 9,000 were injured. Thousands more were left homeless in the freezing winter. No one was ever convicted for any crime. The Deepwater Horizon Disaster. On the evening of April 20th, 2010, about 50 miles off the Louisiana coast, workers on the Deepwater Horizon drilling rig were finishing their work on the Macondo oil well. The crew had just completed a negative pressure test to check if the well was properly sealed with cement, but they ignored the abnormal pressure readings and continued their work. Multiple indicators of a kick, meaning gas in the riser pipe, were also missed by the crew for over 50 minutes. Around 9:40 p.m., mud and gas began surging up the riser pipe onto the rig floor. The crew tried to divert the flow, but it was too late. Gas alarms went off as flammable methane filled the platform. Around 9:49 p.m., the gas ignited in a huge explosion. A second, larger one followed seconds later, engulfing the platform in flames. The cheap blowout preventer on the seafloor failed to seal the well. 11 workers were killed in the explosions and fire. The burning rig sank 2 days later, leaving a broken pipe on the seafloor. For the next 87 days, nearly 5 million barrels of oil poured in the Gulf of Mexico, the largest marine oil spill in history. It caused enormous damage to marine life, beaches, and the fishing industry along the Gulf Coast. The Great Smog of London. In early December 1952, a cold snap hit London. To stay warm, millions of homes and factories burned large amounts of cheap, high-sulfur coal, pumping thick black smoke and sulfur dioxide into the air without restrictions, even though London's poor air quality had been a problem for a long time. On December 5th, a thick natural fog settled over the city. At the same time, the windless weather conditions trapped the coal pollution close to the ground. For 5 full days, the smoke and fog mixed. A thick yellow-black acidic smog hung over London like a dirty blanket. People could barely see their own feet. The air tasted metallic and burned people's throats and eyes. Hospitals filled quickly. Many elderly people and those with lung problems suffocated or died from respiratory failure. When the wind finally changed on December 9th and the smog lifted, the true damage became clear. The Great Smog had killed around 12,000 people and made hundreds of thousands seriously ill. It eventually led to the Clean Air Act. The Peshtigo Fire. In October 1871, the logging region around Peshtigo, Wisconsin, had been suffering from a severe drought for months, turning the forests into a giant tinderbox. Farmers and railroad crews were clearing land by setting small intentional slash-and-burn fires, while industrial logging left massive piles of branches and woody debris scattered everywhere. On the evening of October 8th, strong winds swept through the area. The small clearing fires quickly merged and exploded into a massive firestorm. People had almost no warning. The blaze created its own hurricane-force winds and moved at terrifying speed, jumping rivers and swallowing entire towns in minutes. Many ran into the Peshtigo River and stood neck-deep in water while the fire roared around them. Others were burned alive trying to escape. The fire killed between 1,500 and 2,500 people in just a few hours and burned around 1.2 million acres. It remains the deadliest wildfire in recorded history. The Chernobyl Disaster. On the night of April 25th, 1986, operators at Reactor 4 of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Ukraine began a safety test. The goal was to see if the turbines could still provide power to the cooling pumps if the reactor lost electricity. But to save time and meet a deadline, the operators disabled several important safety systems, including the emergency cooling system. They also pulled out too many control rods, which are used to slow down the nuclear reaction. The reactor design also had a known flaw that made it unstable at low power levels, but they continued anyway. By 1 a.m. on April 26th, the reactor power dropped dangerously low. Instead of stopping the test, the operators tried to raise the power by removing even more control rods. The reactor became extremely unstable. At 1:23 a.m., the test began. Seconds later, there was a sudden massive power surge. The workers pressed the emergency shutdown button, but the control rods got stuck as they entered the core. The core overheated violently. Two powerful explosions blew the 1,000-ton concrete lid off the reactor and destroyed the building, sending radioactive material into the sky. 2 workers died instantly in the explosions. Firefighters rushed in to battle the flames, not fully understanding how dangerous the radiation was. In the following weeks, 28 more people died from acute radiation sickness. The total immediate death toll reached 31. Thousands more deaths from cancer have been linked to the radiation. The explosion released a huge cloud of radioactive material that spread across Europe, contaminating millions of acres of forests and farmland. Thousands of people were evacuated, and a large exclusion zone around the plant remains uninhabitable to this day. The US Prohibition Poisoning. During the 1920s and 30s, the United States had banned the sale and production of alcohol. Frustrated that people were stealing industrial alcohol and turning it into beverages, officials ordered manufacturers to add chemicals like benzol, kerosene, and methanol. They wanted to make the alcohol undrinkable and deadly, so bootleggers couldn't sell it. Some officials viewed it as acceptable collateral damage, but the policy backfired horribly. Bootleggers still stole the alcohol, tried to clean it, and sold it anyway as illegal whiskey and gin across the country. Many drank the contaminated liquor without knowing how dangerous it was. Thousands of people began going blind or dying from organ failure. By the end of Prohibition in 1933, the government's own policy had killed an estimated 10,000 Americans. The Stadium Incident. In 27 AD, in the Italian town of Fidene, near Rome, a man named Attilius had just opened his newly built massive amphitheater to host gladiator games and make loads of money. Unbeknownst to the visitors, the construction had been rushed, using cheap materials and poor methods. The wooden structure had weak foundations that didn't reach solid ground, and the timber beams were badly joined together. On the day of the games, around 50,000 excited spectators packed into the stands, far more people than the structure was built to hold. Then, during the event, the whole thing suddenly collapsed. Thousands of people were crushed under falling timber and debris. At least 20,000 were killed and many more injured.